Well, hi everyone. My name is Chanel Hason. I am the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Elakha Alliance. And so we are a nonprofit based here in Oregon, trying to restore our sea otter population. So I will go very deep into what that means. So my background is in marine and coastal ecology. I went to my undergrad at Cal State Monterey Bay. If you've ever been kayaking around there, it's amazing. Lots of sea otters to see and other marine life. And I volunteered at the Monterey Bay Aquarium with the sea otters and the river otters, and it was fantastic. So if you can't tell, sea otters have been a part of my life for quite some time. I moved to Portland 6 years ago to get my Master's of Science in Leadership for Sustainability Education and landed this job about 1.5 years ago. And it's basically like my dream job because it's pretty amazing. I'll be part of a historic reintroduction of a once native species, and it's really fantastic. So, and yeah, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can get to it at the end. And so first I'm going to kick off a little bit about sea otter history and their biology, and a little bit also about the kelp forest ecology of Oregon's coast. So biodiversity is a term that's sort of thrown around a lot. It's defined as a variety of life in an ecosystem, but the take-home message about why it's important is because it's all about redundancy. So having multiple components in an ecosystem helps buffer the natural fluctuations that any one species or the unnatural or artificial fluctuations that might happen due to human interference. So the concept of functional redundancy implies that species loss is compensated by other species contributing similarly to that function. So, ultimately, if a species goes away, then another species will come take over that role. But in the case of Oregon, there's an imbalance happening at the moment in time. So there's two top predators of the kelp forest ecosystem, sea otters and sunflower sea stars, which you can see on the top two squares. Sunflower sea stars scientific name is Pycnopodia. So if I say that instead of sunflower sea stars, that's what that means. And their top-down effects in the ecosystem benefit kelp by eating grazers, sea urchins, and sea otters also help regulate eelgrass in estuarine environments as well. So right now we have a gap because sea otters have not lived on the Oregon coast for over 112 years. So that predator has been gone for a long time. And the sunflower sea star is also missing, which I'll go into why that's happening over the past several years. So let's dive into how these ecosystems started shifting. So the first big influence from man was the maritime fur trade. Russians, English, and some American mariners that were coming into this region and hunting and trading sea otters for their pelts. So you can see they're quite large in that photograph. It started early in the 1760s, and by 1840, most of the removals had happened. And this was early exploitation of wildlife on the North American continent. And you can see there's an excerpt from the Coos Bay Times in 1910, and this was the last evidence we found of Oregon's original sea otter population. And it was going for about $500 for their pelt. So back then, that was enough money to buy a house with acreage, maybe like overlooking the coastline, which would be great right now. I could afford that if that was still happening. But it was the most valuable pelt in the entire world. And so basically they just got taken out almost completely along the whole Pacific coastline. So by the 1870s, the sea otter population was pretty much extinct from Japan down to Mexico. You can see there where there was small populations that did survive along the Aleutian Islands, Prince William Sound, and then in Big Sur in California, there was a population of around 300 individuals that survived. And so basically that's what the whole population now came from, those little pockets. So the population today, you can see where sea otters are present in yellow. And then there's a 800-mile gap from Washington to California, where sea otters used to be, that they're no longer present, and Oregon is at the top of that red line there. So that is why we're trying to bring them back. So Oregon used to be location. There's 2 subspecies of sea otters, southern sea otters, basically all coming from that 300 population in Big Sur, and northern sea otters. And so Oregon used to be a cross genetic place for both of those subspecies to cross their genetics. And so right now, both of those subspecies are very genetically different. So it would be very crucial for us to get that genetic diversity going. So you may be familiar, in the 1970s, we did have a translocation effort in Oregon. That was because, sorry, they were bombing the Aleutian Islands with the Navy, I believe it was. And so they moved about 100 animals to Cape Arago in 1971, 40 animals there, and in Port Orford, 29 animals in 1970 and 24 in 1971. And some animals appear to have left soon after the release, while others did not, even though they did have pups. In some places, the entire population of animals declined dramatically in 1975 and disappeared by 1981, most likely due to the immediate immigration, which likely left the remaining population below the level needed to withstand expected mortalities. So basically, they just initially didn't introduce enough species or enough individuals to sustain the population long term. So like I said, we haven't had sea otters stay on our coastline for over 112 years now. So our ecosystems have been missing that predator, and it's kind of crazy because nobody alive has ever seen them, what our ecosystem could look like with that predator back in our waters. So I mentioned that the sunflower sea stars, Pycnopodia, are also not along our coastline anymore. And that is because of this blob. So you can see here, all that red is insane. There was a huge, from 2014 to 2016, there was a marine heat wave that warmed the ocean about 3 degrees Celsius above normal, which may not sound like a lot, but in the ocean, that is life-changing. And so with those dramatic high water temperature extremes, it likely caused something called the sea star wasting disease. And so just imagine sea stars just melting. That's basically what it looked like. They just kind of would start disintegrating. So this was huge, and it happened across the whole entire West Coast. Some species have rebounded quite nicely. You can see the ochre sea stars along the Oregon coast. They're more plentiful now. It's very rare to see the sunflower sea star, but there are some sightings recently, which is great, but their population is not what it used to be. So without the sea otters and the Pycnopodia, the sea urchins are, are taking over. So you can see there's an urchin barren, basically meaning the urchins consume everything in sight for the most part and just leave a barren environment. And so let's discuss what our ecosystem look like right now off the Oregon coast. So Port Orford, you can see here in just 2 years what a difference makes. So in June 2016, there was a healthy, thriving bull kelp forest, which is 99% of our kelp here on the Oregon coast. And just 2 years later, you can tell there's just a few stipes left of that bull kelp, and the urchins are just devouring all of it. This is what we would like to see. This is a healthy kelp ecoforest system. Ecosystem, sorry. And so sea urchins are controlled by the predators, the Pycnopodia, the sea urchin or the sea otters, and kelp forests can then flourish and grow to the top of the surface and provide home for lots of different species. And the biologic productivity and diversity is super high. So that is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to achieve here on our coastline. Just because I can, and they're super fun to watch. Here's a cute little sea otter video from the Oregon Zoo. So there's only 2 places in Oregon that you can see sea otters, and that is at the Oregon Coast Aquarium and the Oregon Zoo. And they're just adorable. So how can you not just like watching sea otter videos all day long? But let's talk about a little bit of the differences between sea otters and river otters. Probably if you're kayaking on the Oregon coast, you might run into a couple river otters because they do venture to the coast in the intertidal zone and at river mouths. So you can tell the difference between the two. River otters are smaller, they're not as buoyant, they swim on their stomachs. Sea otters will be on their backs and they have big back flippers, and river otters basically have the same size for all their 4 feet. So they can run, they're super agile along the rocks. So if you see something moving really quickly along the rocks of the Oregon coast, 99% sure it's a river otter. We do sometimes have sea otters, lone males that come down from Washington looking for a lady. Sadly, they're very disappointed because we don't have any ladies here, and they often end up getting bit by a shark, which is their demise because they don't have blubber. And once something punctures their fur, they're done for. There we go. So they are eating machines. They have to eat about 25% of their body weight a day to maintain that high metabolism since they don't have blubber. So a 70-pound sea otter needs to eat about 20 pounds of food every day, and that's about 3.6 tons a year. And you can see here their diet consists mostly of sea urchins, crabs, mussels, clams, and each diet varies between individual, which is usually based on what their mom taught them. So if their mom really liked clams, they're probably also going to really like clams. So there's not one, specific diet for every sea otter. It varies. And they also have short, blunt skulls, as you can see here, with flat, fracture-resistant teeth. So they've got super strong canines to crush open all those hard marine invertebrates like crabs and urchins. So this allows them to have a super high force bite for their body size, which is about 80 pounds of force. So even though they look super cute, please never put your fingers near their mouths because you might be missing a couple fingers later. So how do they keep warm? As you probably know, they have about a million hairs per square inch. So their fur is incredibly dense, which is how they keep warm. They actually have 2 sets of fur. They have an outer guard hair, which is about 1 3/4 or 1 1/3 inches long. And when properly groomed, it lays flat against their body. And underneath that guard hair, it's another layer of fur that stays completely dry. So that's why you see them constantly grooming themselves, because they're trying to put a pocket of air between those 2 layers so that their fur underneath never actually gets wet. So it's pretty incredible stuff. So they are a keystone species, which is really important for the marine ecosystem. So it means their role in the environment has a greater effect than any other species. So as top predators, they maintain the balance of the nearshore ecosystems, such as kelp forests and estuaries. And without them, the sea urchin population overpopulates the seafloor and then is very detrimental to other animals that depend on the healthy kelp forest ecosystem. So here's a little scientific picture graph, basically. And so this shows habitats where there were no sea otters present. And then it shows when otters are present for under 6 years in the marine ecosystem. And then it shows when otters are present for over 10 years, how it dramatically changes the ecosystem for the better, which increases biodiversity and productivity overall. So it increases fish abundance, mussel growth, and it also helps with predators on land, which I'll talk about in a second. So why should you care about kelp? It's super duper important. Just think of forests on land, how important that's, especially in Oregon, because it surrounds us, how it provides a safe habitat for so many different species. In the ocean, the kelp helps, maintain a place where eggs and larvae can drift through and spread out across the ocean. And it helps be a buffer for ocean waves and currents, and protects our shorelines. And also it helps us with climate change. So it helps fight climate change. And how does it do that? So it removes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So a kelp forest, when it's present, can sequester about almost 1,900 pounds per acre of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And basically an urchin barren without kelp, it's only 21 pounds per acre. So actually the kelp forest can sequester about 20 times more carbon per acre than land forests. So take that, land forests. But as a visual learner, this is, I like to put this in here about exactly how it sequesters carbon. So through photosynthesis, it absorbs the CO2 and then it's stuck in their cells. And then once it dies with the bulbs, it floats out to sea and ultimately sinks down to the bottom of the sea floor to be buried for eternity, hopefully. And so that carbon is just stored in the seafloor forever and takes it out of the atmosphere. But wait, there's more about why you should love kelp. Like I said, so even above the surface, it's super beneficial to have a healthy kelp forest ecosystem for all our marine birds out there. It also helps with the birds in on the shoreline, because when bull kelp and detritus and so forth washes ashore, bugs and little invertebrates go crazy, and it's a perfect habitat for all those little shorebirds to feast away, and also some predatory birds too, like the peregrine falcon and eagles, and hopefully the California condor will visit our coastline soon too. Megafauna also depend on healthy kelp forests, like our gray whale population. When I went diving in Port Orford in October, as soon as I went down, I just had a ton of mysid shrimp swim across my face, and that is exactly what gray whales eat. So I was secretly just listening, hoping to hear a gray whale come by, but it didn't happen one day. But wait, there's also more fun, exciting things to share with you about climate change and how healthy ecosystems work in our advantage. So in the estuarine habitat, so estuaries, there was a recent finding from a researcher about why in the Elkhorn Slough outside of Monterey, there seemed to be better water quality than normal. And this is, if you're not familiar with Elkhorn Slough, it basically is a deposit from a lot of agricultural runoff. And so it just didn't make quite enough sense. So he basically figured out that when sea otters are present in the ecosystem where there's eelgrass, they eat the crabs, and crabs usually graze on these small sea snails and slugs that eat the algae off of eelgrass. So without sea otters present, the crabs will eat all of those sea slugs and snails, which allows algae to grow on the eelgrass, which means the eelgrass is kind of just covered in a blanket and they can't photosynthesize. And so then it ultimately doesn't, work as a plant. So with the sea otters keeping that in balance, the eelgrass can also sequester carbon, just like kelp, and help with climate change. So it benefits the whole entire ecosystem on top of that for nurseries, for fish and crab, and also waterfowl, migratory waterfowl. So it is all really wonderful. So let's talk about bringing them back to Oregon and a little bit about who we are with Elakha Alliance and what exactly that means for us to do. So we were started originally as an idea from the late David Hatch, who was a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And he was naming a boat with his son Peter and came across the word Elakha in a Chinook jargon dictionary. And then he was like, there's a word for sea otter. Where are the sea otters along the Oregon coast? And so that led to activism and outreach. And so we became an official Oregon nonprofit in 2018. And we adopted a strategic plan in 2019 and became or received our 501c3 status in April of 2020. So even though we haven't been around that long, we have accomplished a lot, which I will go into. So our mission is to restore a healthy population of sea otters along the Oregon coast, and in the process, help our Oregon marine ecosystem become more robust and resilient. And there's a little photo of me scuba diving in Port Orford, like I said previously, looking at a holdfast of a bull kelp that's pretty much been eaten halfway by a bunch of urchins. So our strategic objective, so we completed the first one, assess the scientific and economic feasibility study of sea otter restoration. So we just published a feasibility study in January of 2022. You can check it out on our website, elakhalliance.org. We're actually getting it made into a really wonderful book document for libraries and such. So be on the lookout for that. And next up, this year, we're hoping to reach regional consensus for restoration. And then number 3, proceed with restoration in carefully chosen places along the Oregon coast. So I wish it was all that simple with just 3 sentences, but I'll dive a little deeper into what all of that means. So implementing a mission into reality. So we worked on the science. We had the top 6 sea otter scientists in the world help us make that feasibility study. And then once we proceed with the decision and planning, we will get animals in the water like that. So as I mentioned, our feasibility study is on our website. It is super, super duper thorough and science heavy, but thanks to myself and Andy Johnson from the Defenders of Wildlife, who's a partner of ours, there's short summaries for each chapter that you can read that is easily understood. But as you can tell, we focused on pretty much all the topics you would need to consider the feasibility of reintroducing them here along the Oregon coast. So I'll let you jump on our website and look for yourself if you're interested in that. But hold on, let's pause. Everyone grab a drink real quick. So the bottom line was that reintroductions, yes, are a super successful conservation tool. It's likely to succeed here in Oregon, reintroducing them, obviously with appropriate considerations that are outlined in our feasibility study. Estuaries are also a really important reintroduction site. As we learned in the Elkhorn Slough in Monterey and their reintroductions there, it's been super successful. And also social, economic, and regulatory issues must be considered. So yes, all of that is in a lot of detail on our website. I don't have time to go over everything in detail, but you get the picture. So we do have, as part of our feasibility study, Tim Tinker, who is the head author. He created a sea otter population model. So you don't have to understand that science math equation there, but basically you can go online for yourself and plug in all the information you would want for a reintroduction. So pick a site, pick the number of years that you want to implement reintroduction, the number of female otters, the number of male otters, and all that good stuff. And then you can hit play and see what the population model will look like in all of these different locations. So it's really amazing, amazing science work. So we did a coastwide assessment. If 100 animals were introduced, 70 initial, and then 3 every year for the next 10 years. And so there were some sites along the Oregon coast that scored higher than everywhere else, and it's mostly along the southern Oregon coast. So you can see here Rogue Reef, Port Orford, Redfish Rocks, Cape Blanco, Orford Reef, Cape Arago, Coos Bay, Tillamook Bay, but we wouldn't reintroduce them all the way up there. So just stick into the southern Oregon coast is pretty much the best habitat for a reintroduction. And you can see here, these are the 4 locations that rated the highest so far on that population scenario. So you can, if you wanted to jump on to the ORSO model and do that yourself, I can put the link in the chat afterwards. Obviously, there is some considerations with using the model. There's uncertainty, establishment period, release site success, slow expansion, and then using multiple release locations would be more effective than just using one spot to release them only. So we have some science deliverables that we're currently working on right now. We have a wonderful group who is making some GIS maps for us, going to be the Elakha Atlas on our website, hopefully in a couple months. So you can go there and, you know, pick where sea otters would most likely thrive, and then also put in fishing data, and also put in crabbing data, and tribal data lands, and all like 30+ different map overlays, and see where they intersect. We saw a preview of it recently at our board meeting. It's really amazing stuff, and as a visual person, it's great to see. And then soon you will be able to do that as well. So let's see, obviously we need a plan for pre and post release monitoring research. So we might need some of you citizen scientists out on your kayaks, observing and documenting otters in the water, obviously from a safe distance. So if that interests you, let me know. We're working on right now shark research, which is super big because there's really not a lot on the Oregon coast. So we're putting money towards that research this year. And obviously climate change, as I mentioned before, is happening, and what that could mean for potential translocation. So we're working with scientists on that fact too. And as I mentioned, the southern Oregon coast is the most likely habitat for sea otter reintroduction. So we hired Frank Burris, who lives in Gold Beach, and he's our South Coast community liaison. So he's working closely with the communities down there to figure out any concerns and make sure that there's a good consensus and understanding of what a reintroduction would look like in those communities. So I'm not sure if you heard over Thanksgiving time last year, but we did have a little guy out in the Aquina Head, just floating out there by himself for at least like 2 weeks or so, and he caused quite a stir. And there were hundreds of people nonstop every day going just to see that one single otter, which is kind of astounding, because just think if we reintroduce several populations along the Oregon coast, just how big of a boom tourism wise it would be for those coastal communities, for people to see these, you know, charismatic little creatures out on our shoreline. So it's kind of a nice little glimpse of the future for hopefully potential reintroduction. And sadly, he did wash ashore shortly afterwards with puncture wounds from a shark bite, and was taken in by the aquarium and passed away. But he also had some neurological issues as well. So there's that. So if you want to learn more and stay connected with what we're doing, please visit our website, and you can sign up for our email newsletter. I just send it once a month. I'm not going to spam you a bunch. And we're also across all your favorite social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel is really thorough. We have so many webinars, and our Sea Otter Science Symposium from the last 2 years are on there as well. So you can learn from scientists, and it's super thorough. And basically any questions you have probably about kelp or sea otters can be answered via one of these webinars. we have great partnerships with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Obviously, that's a huge partner we need to have on our side for a reintroduction effort in Oregon. So Paul Henson, Michelle Schwartzes, and Lillian Carswell have been really wonderful partners for us, working through what this would look like in the future. The Oregon Zoo is an amazing partner with us. So also on our YouTube channel, check out those 2 videos that the Oregon Zoo helped us with. The first one that pops up is Peter Hatch's video on the cultural significance of Oregon sea otters. And then we have one on the ecological and economic impact of Oregon sea otters as well. So I highly suggest that you take a look at those. We have we have so many wonderful partners that obviously this is a collaborative effort to reintroduce the species. So we're very thankful for all of them and their funding and grants. So we did put on an Oregon Otter Beer Fest in March in Portland at OMSI, and it was a huge success. It was sold out. It was also coincidentally the same day the mask mandate got lifted. So I think there was a lot of good things happening for people on that evening. But I am actually working now to make this an annual event and switch from the coast to Portland every year. So I'm looking into venues on the coast for next year. So if you have any ideas, let me know. And also we just kicked off a tribal youth summer internship program. So thanks to funding from the Siletz tribe and the Grand Ronde tribes, we were able to hire 2 wonderful interns, Caitlin and Grayson. So I am managing them in a 10-week summer internship, and they're going to create a cultural traveling display highlighting the cultural significance of sea otters here in Oregon. So that'll go up and down the coast to different locations in the fall. So they'll be presenting in a webinar in August about their project and what they created. So stay tuned for that. It's really wonderful. And we just hired our first executive director ever. We're a very small nonprofit. So now there's 2 paid employees, full-time employees, myself and Jane Beccari. So she's got an amazing background in organizational management and natural resources and understands the Oregon coast. She's also a paddler. And so we're very excited to have her on board. And she starts July 5th. Okay, boom. I thought it was going to be a lot longer than that, so that makes me happy. Looks like there may be some questions, so let me know.
Thanks, Chanel. Right now, there aren't any in the chat. I posted the links that you had shared before. So I guess if folks do have questions, I invite you to come off mute, or it looks like, oh, Melody just raised a hand. Melody, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. What are some of the areas of pushback for this idea, either from people or from resources or just from the environment?
Yeah, great question. Well, we've had a petition from the sea urchins. They said they don't like this idea. Just kidding. I bet they would though say that. We do have, some concerns with fishermen and crabbers along the Oregon coast that, think that sea otters are just going to blow up in population and eat all of their catch. But research has shown it's actually been beneficial for fisheries and the crabbing industry over a period of multiple years. Once the ecosystem gets healthier and healthier, then their catches also increase in numbers as well. So it's just we obviously have relationships with all those people, so we work closely to hear their concerns and figure out what's the best way to manage everyone to the happiest ground there is.
Yeah. Where else has this been done besides California?
Washington, British Columbia, Alaska.
Wow. Okay. And how many years ahead of us are they in doing it?
Well, they released them in the 70s as well in Washington, California, and Alaska and British Columbia, when the Aleutian Islands got bombed. So there's a whole chapter on every relocation of sea otters in the world in our feasibility study. So if you really want to jump into that, I would suggest to take a look at that. But yeah, their population is pretty pretty successful in all those locations right now. Alaska is where 90% of all the sea otter population lives. So that's where we would get our species, is the northern sea otters from Alaska.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm curious, how do you go about getting the otters you're going to move?
Right? I'm curious too. So we have, that's also in our feasibility study outlined how you would translocate these species. It's been done before. And every time you learn from, mistakes and don't make those mistakes again. And so I think by the time a sea otter reintroduction happens here in Oregon, hopefully within the next 5 years, that it will be pretty successful, because it hasn't been done super recently anywhere else. But yeah, it's I'm not sure of all the logistics, but hopefully I'll be there to document it when it happens. But yeah, I would say to check out our feasibility study on the translocation efforts, and there's pictures and so forth of how they've done it in the past.
Are there other places in the world where this would be good to happen?
So our friends to the south in California are actually trying to reintroduce them in San Francisco Bay. So we are working with them on our efforts, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is also addressing California and Oregon reintroduction in their own feasibility study. So yeah, that's, like I said, there's an 800-mile gap from Washington to Central California, really, that there used to be sea otters. So there's still a whole lot of the California coastline that is missing sea otters as well.
Yeah. And are they just a West Coast?
Yeah, it goes all the way from, they used to be all the way in Baja, Mexico, and all the way up the Pacific coastline, all the way to Japan. So.
Okay.
So there's a question in the chat from Susan wondering if there's a Canadian equivalent of the initiative.
Of like what the Elakha Alliance is doing, I'm guessing is what you're asking. Not that I know of. I believe what we're doing is pretty groundbreaking for the state of Oregon and for sea otter reintroduction. That's really based off of the cultural connection of sea otters with the tribes, and on top of the ecological and economic benefits as well.
And then there's not a question, but a thank you that I don't know if you're seeing, but someone is on, on this from who, sorry, is an Oregon Zoo volunteer, and saying that they're excited about the work and hearing about the new executive director. So congratulations.
Wonderful. Yay. Thanks for volunteering at the zoo. I hung out with a couple of the otter peeps there. They're wonderful. How does water temperature vary between Alaska and Oregon, and would that impact the success of your project? I'm not 100% sure on the temperature variations, but if you've ever been diving in the Oregon coast, it's quite cold. So that is, kelp forests need cold, nutrient-rich water to thrive. And that's what we have on the southern Oregon coast, and that's what they have in Monterey Bay. And so I don't think that's really going to be a factor in the reintroduction efforts. But that's a great question.
Thanks. Are there any other questions from other folks?
How long has it been that there haven't been sea otters here in Oregon?
112 years.
Wow.
There was that relocation in the 70s for about 10 years, but it didn't take.
And I missed the beginning of your presentation, but did you say why they aren't here anymore?
Yeah, so they were bombing the Aleutian Islands for military research. And so a bunch of scientists were like, well, there's a big population of sea otters here. What are you going to do? So they kind of frantically had to put together a plan and capture them and relocate them and to different places. And so there's only about 100 released. And there was a lot of them just got here and left. So they emigrated away. There were some that did have pups successfully, but just the initial population that they released, it wasn't enough to forego that initial immigration and mortality that happens with the translocation for that population to thrive in the future over time, which is all it's all based off of the Orso model that Tim Tinker did that I talked about in our feasibility study, where you can pick and choose how many sea otters and over time and years and introductions and all that good stuff. Now that we have way more research and understanding about these species.
Gotcha, thank you.
So there's a question about shark species. Which ones are the predators of the sea otters, and do they have other predators?
Yeah. So great whites, usually juvenile great whites that are learning, they're coming off of feeding off of fish to marine mammals like seals and sea lions. And so they mistake a sea otter for one of those blubbery, delicious ones, the seal or sea lion, and they just get a mouthful of fur and spit it out, and they don't eat them because they're not full of fat. So once the sea otter has a puncture wound, then that pocket of air that keeps them warm is no longer there. So they pretty much can't survive and can't keep warm anymore. So it turns fatal in most cases for those otters. And so, which is why we want to invest in shark research, so we don't put sea otters, a population of sea otters, in some, mysterious great white hangout spot along the Oregon coast that we don't know about. So that's important for us to figure out. 7-gilled shark, somebody asked that on Instagram today. They're listed in our feasibility study as a potential predator, but not super high on the list of predators.
Oh.
Yes.
I think that just might be someone off mute. Let me go ahead and.
So those are mainly kind of the top two. Do they have any other predators? Sometimes orcas. But for the most part, it's just shark bites that will get them, or humans, sadly, sometimes.
And then there's another question. Do our First Nations people have a concern that if sea otter numbers increase, their ability to harvest sea urchins will decline?
That has not been a concern raised for us. No.
All right. Are there other questions folks have?
Here's one from Colin. With the disappearance of kelp forests and the otters' reliance on the kelp forest ecosystem, do you see limited ranges for reintroduction? So there is still a healthy population of kelp forests along the southern Oregon coast on a lot of the rocky reefs down there. So that is obviously something that we're keeping a close eye on. And we're also working with other organizations like ORCA, which stands for the Oregon Kelp Alliance. And so they are culling urchins in 5 different locations. And so hopefully over time with that culling effort, there will be time for bull kelp to repopulate in those locations for a sea otter release. Great question.
And Chanel, you had mentioned at some point there might be opportunities for kayakers to help with counts. Is that something in the next year or a little ways further out? Or
No, I'd probably say a little further out. This is, a huge project, and it takes time and a lot of planning. And so we've done a lot over the last 2 years, and we still have some work to do with creating the reintroduction plan and post-management plan. So hopefully in the next, I'd say, hopeful 5 years, we'll have them in the water, and then that will open opportunities up for citizen scientists to, document where they see them and how many they see, and that will be really important for us. And hopefully we'll, have an app that's easy to use on your phone to do that. And Sea Otter Savvy is a group out of California that is really wonderful in helping explain how to safely observe sea otters in the wild, so you don't disturb them. So if you have any questions about how you would do that, I would check out their website. They've got some really great resources on there.
Awesome. So this is really interesting work. I didn't know about a lot of what you shared, so I appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And I'm curious, until we can be in our boats with our phones at a safe distance, helping count, what are the best ways that folks can support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so signing up for our newsletter is great, so you can stay educated in what our efforts are. And we are a nonprofit, so we're solely based off of donations and grant funding from different organizations. So you can become a monthly donor for as little or as much as your heart desires. We also have some really great merchandise on our website. They can, sport a Elakha sweatshirt. And if I see you, along the coast or in Portland, I'm going to give you a high five and kind of freak out a little bit, because I love when I see it in the wild or somebody knows what the Elakha Alliance is. It makes me really happy. And yeah, you can sign up also to be a volunteer. So there's a place on our website. So if you have certain admin skills or photography or really any skill set that you think you could help with anything that we do, I always ask people to, write that into the volunteer document, and I have a standing list. So if I need to find somebody who's an artist maybe to help us with something, then I can look through our volunteer database and see if somebody can help us, or a graphic designer or a photographer, or, any of those kinds of things, or somebody to help write a blog post. That's more your thing behind a computer screen. Yes, glad, Pollyann, that you got your coffee cup. So yeah, those are some ways to help us in the long run. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have time for if anyone has a question you haven't asked that you're sitting on, if you want to. Otherwise, we can say thank you once again. Are there any last questions? And I can't see all the participants right now, so if you're raising your hand or trying to wave me down, just pop it in the chat or come off mute.
I'll stop sharing.
All right, I'm gonna come back to gallery view. I'm gonna also stop the recording now at this point, because sometimes people are shy with the recording and don't want to ask, so I'm gonna do that.